Ladies, gentlemen, and Nightfarers of all ages, there are 8 characters to choose from when playing Elden Ring Nightreign, and today I want to talk in detail about the one that I think is potentially the best for increasing the chances of a full group success. Not necessarily for solo play, though you can play him in solo runs successfully, but he just has incredibly high benefit and impact to offer a full group, and this is Ironeye. He gets you more loot drops throughout a run, he makes your whole party do more damage and get more staggers, and he can clear out large groups of densely packed smaller enemies in a single blow, though it is on an admittedly long cooldown. Of course, as well, he's the character focused heavily around ranged weaponry, and bows in particular, and a part of this focus, and the way that the rest of his abilities work, it makes Ironeye incredible at reviving downed allies, better than anyone else really, because you want to have a bow in your hands regardless, which gives you an easy way to safely pick out people from a distance. Not to mention, because revives are based on damage, your ultimate skill can technically revive allies too, and do so incredibly quickly. All that to say, Ironeye is super strong, and in my opinion, the singular character that can have the largest impact on other players' success, to the point where I think it's a good idea to have one player on Ironeye out of any group of 3 you could create, even just for reviving, if nothing else. That said, now that you know why I think you should play Ironeye, let's go over his kit, and we'll also cover his caboodle too. First things first, here are his attributes. You'll notice the A in dexterity, and that might make you think that some melee weapons would work with him too, and to be clear, you can use melee weapons with Ironeye, you can even get decent scaling on dexterity melee weapons, but Ironeye is one of the squishiest characters as far as his HP scaling, so if you want to play in melee range, I generally recommend just picking another character to begin with and staying further away on Ironeye because of the low health. After all, being the bow specialist, Ironeye even gets a unique sort of feint attack with the bow, where if you press heavy attack with the bow, which is a triple shot for this character, and then press the dodge button while it is still sort of charging up, you will do a backwards evade, canceling it, and still fire the arrows normally. This can be quite useful for sort of baiting an enemy into attacking you, dealing damage to them while also evading their damage at the same time. Ironeye just gains so many benefits from being ranged and focusing on bows, not the least of which being the ability to revive allies at range, which I cannot stress enough how big of a deal this actually is. That said, you will also see on the attributes the B in Arcane, which is actually not bad at all, and it means that Ironeye scales statuses reasonably well as well. So generally speaking, I recommend looking for bows, and if you can find status-based bows as well, that is a great combo. Things like Poison buildup, Scarlet Rot buildup, or Frostbite for more passive solid effects that you can then swap off of onto another bow once the effect is applied, or something like Bleed just to pepper a billion shots out until the bleed procs have broken the enemy down. Death by 1,000 punctures. Aside from that, we also do have B stamina scaling, which is of course important as firing a bow repeatedly does take a lot of stamina, and as such, one of the things I recommend trying to build on Ironeye during a run are stamina increases, stamina regeneration, or things of that nature to just make it easier to keep up a prolonged barrage of arrows. Moving on, let's talk about each of his abilities in detail, as only one of them actually has an accurate description. The other 2 are extremely vague compared to what their effect actually does. First, his passive Eagle Eye. This said that it discovers more items to obtain from foes, and that the effect of this ability also applies to allies. What this specifically applies to is any enemy that you kill. It doesn't affect bosses that drop items or dormant powers, it doesn't affect chests that you open when items come out of them, it just gives a higher chance of item drops when you, or any member of your party, kills an enemy. This is reasonably helpful, of course. It gives you more things to sift through, and especially early game, it can get you some big upgrades right at the start, if you get lucky. But as this doesn't affect the sources of higher rarity equipment, you aren't likely to get like a legendary weapon out of this effect. You will, however, get loads of consumables that could be helpful, and even if it's not legendary equipment that drops, it could always just have a good passive or 2 to stick into one of your unused weapon slots. So this will just be a passive thing while playing Ironeye, as it is his passive ability, but it is generally quite good. It's not completely busted, but it's solid. The big thing that is maybe sort of busted that makes Ironeye ridiculous is his character skill, which is called Marking. This says it cuts your foe with a dagger, creating a temporary weak point. Inflict damage on the weak point to destroy it and stagger foes, and damaging the weak point extends its duration. This is sort of a lot of words that doesn't properly explain what it does, and it has an extra effect that isn't even mentioned here that's a pretty big deal. So when you activate this ability, you will dash a fair distance in the direction your left stick is pointing. Otherwise, if you're not touching it, it will go towards your targeted foe or just straight forwards. If you dash through an enemy, they will be marked. If you dash through multiple enemies, all of them will be marked. This says that it creates a weak point, but there is no aim or anything required once the mark is applied. That's just fancy wording for saying that it applies a debuff to the target. With a mark applied, the target will then just take around 10% increased damage from all sources for the full duration of the mark, meaning allies as well get a damage bonus against anything that you apply this debuff to, as well any damage type that they could be using, and that in itself is pretty massive for something with a short cooldown like this. But if you also do enough damage while the mark is applied, you'll get a burst of bonus damage like a status proc happening on the enemy, which will also flinch most bosses out of their animations and even fully stagger on some weaker enemies. If that sounds powerful, it is, but it's still not done because every time you apply damage to an enemy with a weak point on them, it extends the duration. This means if you hit the enemy frequently enough, even when dealing low amounts of damage like at the start of a run, you can get the actual larger pops of damage because you extend the debuff duration. And even if you don't have enough damage yet to get the big pops at all, it is still a 10% damage increase against that enemy while it's going on regardless. This means that you can make it so bosses especially just take more damage and stagger more often, and all you have to do is dash through them on cooldown and then shoot at them afterwards. That said, a couple of bonus things to note about this ability. First is that it has excellent traversal potential. Like, it sends you absolutely flying in the direction that you are moving, and so you can use this for burst repositioning whenever you need to avoid big attacks, or maybe just to sneak around to the backside of an enemy, or even just when running around, things like that. However, I mostly don't recommend doing that, as the weak points themselves are just such a strong mechanic, and using this on anything but an enemy just feels like a waste. That said, an ideal use of this ability is to apply the weak point and reposition, as if an enemy is about to hit you with a melee attack, you can use this to dash through them, apply the weak point, and then you are behind them safely. Generally speaking, I would say that this skill is so strong that the main marker of how well you are doing with Ironeye is how often you are using this when it's available. It is such a high impact skill on such a low cooldown that it basically makes it worth using the entire character regardless of the rest of his kit, just for the effect that this has against bosses especially. Then finally we have the ultimate ability for this character, which is Single Shot. Not the most exciting name, but it has a very powerful effect. Now, marking is effective on groups, but it definitely shines the brightest against big single target enemies like bosses. Single Shot, however, is the opposite. It does have a really long cooldown because it is an ultimate skill. It is a singular piercing arrow shot that is then followed up by a wind blast aftershock that does loads of damage over a massive range in a cylinder shape in front of you extending from the player. Importantly, the wind blast also passes through terrain and stuff like that, and so you can clear like most of an entire camp of enemies out with one use of this ability if you aim it right through walls and stuff. You can hold the input while launching it off to delay the shot slightly. The only benefits of doing so are to extend the invulnerability frames, as all ultimates do make you invincible while casting them, or if your target is doing like strafing runs and trying to dodge you somehow, and otherwise you mostly just want to let it rip as quickly as you can. An extra note about this is that it completely ignores defenses, and so this makes it really good at just applying generally lots of damage in a large area, provided that you of course find the right lineup to get lots of enemies in a straight line. That said, this also makes the ability extremely good for just taking out big groups in one shot and then saving a bunch of time whenever it's off cooldown, when you're running around the map just trying to kill stuff and collect levels. It still has uses for stuff like bosses if it comes on cooldown when you are fighting one, as it of course does do okay damage in itself, if not as good single target damage as some other ultimate skills on different characters. But the big impact it can have against a boss is that the wind aftershock effect pretty consistently causes a flinch against bosses. So if they are in the middle of a dangerous attack, or if they are attacking a teammate who is clearly in trouble, you can create a quick moment of safety for them by using this. Or alternatively, if you coordinate with your teammates, you can tell them to prepare to be extra aggressive because the boss will stop attacking for a moment when you hit them with this. The point being, the main use case of it is just clearing out lots of little guys, but it is still quite malleable depending on the situation. Past that, I want to touch on relics. I won't get into specific relics, of course, as there is a massive amount of RNG around the system, but generally speaking, you want to get things that increase dexterity, as that is your main scaling stat in general. Things that help with stamina management, things that can give you more status buildup, or ones that give status buildup on your starting weapon are great for helping out early game gameplay. But there are also things like Ironeye specific relics that can affect the marking ability, which again is so unbelievably strong as a skill, so if you find anything that affects that, even the more general like character skill cooldown reduction ones, those are all quite good on Ironeye. Then for group play specifically, as the main game mode of the game of course, there is obvious potential for specific synergy between different characters you can play, but the only one that really has a specific ability that benefits Ironeye is the Raider, who can create a physical object with his ultimate ability that Ironeye can then perch up on and stand on top of to get some high ground and safety while firing the bow from up there. This isn't necessarily the biggest deal, there are plenty of enemies that can still hit you up there, and for the most part, who you pair with Ironeye is less important than just pairing Ironeye himself with others, as again, he makes the entire party stronger, regardless of who they are or what they are doing. Then finally, before we round off, I want to touch on solo play specifically as Ironeye as well. Generally speaking, he is a bit of an odd one for solo play, because while his kit in general has significant benefits to any party members that you play with, the lowered health of enemies on solo play means that you can use his marking skill with much less coordination required, and often you can trigger the actual pop and stagger with only a couple of good hits. Nothing changes much about how you use his actual abilities, they still have the same strengths and use scenarios, but I would also mention that because the ultimate skill has iframes on it, and because you can hold it before letting go, especially against bosses where it doesn't have much single target damage, you can use the ultimate just as a big period of immunity, more than anything, to avoid a scary attack. As for general solo play, ideally, solo is the one time that I would say it is reasonable to go with a melee weapon on Ironeye, as not every enemy can be easily defeated with a bow, but it is still better to build around a bow and to have a bow and be prepared to use a bow on things like boss fights. As well, it can be a little bit slow for clearing out little guys. Having a bow against a boss, especially a night boss that doesn't have a timer, means that you can play it super safely. Stay as far away as you can from them while still dealing damage, and while there are absolutely bosses that have mechanics to punish ranged players, there is much less of that than there is danger in melee in general. So when a boss is fully focusing you, such as when you're playing solo and you still want to use a bow, this is when you would start kiting. This is the act of basically moving backwards as you fire so that you are constantly staying out of range of the enemy's hits while still doing damage yourself. Of course, it's still worth paying attention to the animations to know when you need to roll. A specifically good shout is if you can find a bow with sky shot early game, like early on the first day early game. These are really good at just decimating any particularly large enemies from further than max distance. The aim on this is not great, it has no tracking at all, so it's bad against anything small or anything moving, but it completely destroys larger enemies from beyond the safest distance that you can with any other bow attack. Finally, for solo play, you want to change some of your desired gear to things that boost critical hit damage. The marking skill will get you lots of staggers along your journey, and when playing solo, the only person who can get the crit that follows a stagger is also you. So get a nice melee weapon for crits, get some passive boost to crit damage if possible, and then otherwise, for the most part, you just play it like regular Ironeye. It's tough, no doubt about it, but he's not a terrible solo character by any means. Just the low HP on him does make it quite punishing more than anything else. That just about does it for today, then everyone. A guide to Ironeye as the Nightfarer that I think has the highest impact on a group's overall success. He's not going to like one-shot a boss at any point, he's not going to tank 1,000 hits by any means, but he just makes everything you do a little bit easier, a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient. And all of that really adds up across a full expedition run. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and I hope you enjoy using Ironeye for yourselves in the game. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.